Good morning and welcome back to another virtual edition of Children's Church. And we have a lot to talk about today because our story is getting very interesting very fast. Our special verse of the week is from Joshua chapter 1, verse 9. It says, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." What an amazing promise that we can remember that God is with us all the time. He's everywhere. There's nowhere we can go that we would hide or be too far away from God. He's always with us, and He loves us and cares for us, and we don't have to be afraid in any situation, no matter what's happening. And now it's time for a history moment. Before we dive into our story, and we have a ton of things to talk about, war is coming. That's right. We need to look back in history for a second and remind ourselves about Israel as a young nation. When they were just starting to get together and become a country, if you will, or whatever, they had one enemy that was just so annoying. They were always on their shoulder in a way, not literally sitting on their shoulder. That would be really weird. This people called the Philistines, or the Philistines, depending on who you ask, but I'm just going to say Philistines because that's what I always said when I was younger. So the Philistines, they were a nation that did a lot of their life on the sea and on boats and whatnot, and they would constantly annoy and pester and pick on and fight and hurt the Israelites. They hated the Israelites. And you'll remember there's one very famous Philistine who was totally defeated by the Israelites. Do you remember his name? He was really big. It was Goliath, right? That giant from David and Goliath. Well, that Philistine, these are the same Philistines that we're seeing today. As a matter of fact, David and Goliath is going to be coming in a little while. So spoiler alert, because I just told you the end of that story. Well, yeah, for the most part. But anyways, so the Philistines, they are going to make war with Israel today. And we're going to see if Israel ends up being victorious over the Philistines or defeated. It's story time! Oh, I didn't know you guys were actually here. I thought that was just my voice recording. Embarrassing. Anyways, so 1 Samuel chapter 4 is where we are, and you'll remember that we left off with Samuel having this incredible encounter with God, where God spoke to him, like literally spoke to him so that he could hear God. Amazing. But what God had to say to Samuel was not exactly the news he wanted to hear, because it was news about the great punishment that was going to be happening to Eli, the high priest, because of his sons, Hophni and Phinehas, and all of the sin that was going on in their family, which was not something that Samuel wanted to share with Eli, but he did. And Samuel, he began to grow in knowing the Lord, not just knowing about God, but actually knowing him, having that personal friendship, relationship with God, where he would really get to know who he was, and he'd hear from God, and he would follow him and listen to him and tell other people his message. So 1 Samuel chapter 4 is where we are. Verse 1, it says, "And the word of Samuel came to all Israel." So the messages that Samuel was getting from God, he was telling it to all of Israel, and everybody was hearing these messages from Samuel. So people are going to need to know who this Samuel is, this prophet that was actually hearing from God. Now, Israel went out to battle against the Philistines. They encamped at Ebenezer, and the Philistines encamped at Aphek. The Philistines drew up in line against Israel, and when the battle spread, Israel was defeated before the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men on the field of battle. And when the people came to the camp, the elders of Israel said, "Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord here from Shiloh, that it may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies." The Israelites were defeated in battle against the Philistines. And this might seem strange. Why would God's people who have, the all-powerful God who is strong and mighty on their side be defeated? Well, there's two parts to this. The first part is that sometimes, even though we are following God and we're his people, sometimes he allows things to happen that don't make any sense to us. He allows different sicknesses or hardships and bad things to come our way. But we're promised that God will always use them. Whatever bad things happen, he will use for his good. Now, the other thing that's happening here is that it kind of makes sense that Israel was defeated. Not just because the Philistines were strong, vicious, ruthless people in battle, but because Israel, you'll remember, was not following after God. So it kind of makes sense that God would just kind of allow them to be defeated because he wouldn't be fighting with them since they weren't actually following him. They were really turning to their own way. They were deciding to do whatever they wanted to do. They didn't care what God had to say. And so it kind of makes sense that they got defeated by the Philistines. But then they had a brilliant, not really, idea to bring the Ark of the Covenant with them out onto the field. Things were not going well for Israel, and they were very scared. But as soon as the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel gave a mighty shout so that the earth resounded. Woohoo! Yeah, that's right. We winning today. Oh, yeah. That's right. Come at me, bro. Come at me, bro. We gonna win. We winning today. That's right. We winning. That's right. We win. What? And when the Philistines heard the noise of the shouting, they said, "What does this great shouting in the camp of the Hebrews mean?" And when they learned that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp, the Philistines were afraid, for they said, "A god has come into the camp." And they said, "Woe to us, for nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us! Who can deliver us from the power of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with every sort of plague in the wilderness." "Take courage and be men, O Philistines, lest you become slaves to the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Be men and fight. Charge!" The Israelites thought that just because they had the Ark of the Covenant with them, that they would win. The Ark of the Covenant, that was that thing in the Holy of Holies where God's presence dwelled, right? But they treated the Ark of the Covenant like other people treated idols, those fake gods that would represent the God. And they thought just because they had this thing with them that they were going to win this war. But the truth was that God was not on their side because they were rebelling against God. They were doing what they wanted to do whenever they wanted to do it. They didn't care what God had to say. And just because they brought the Ark of the Covenant in during this battle did not mean that God was going to start fighting for them. And as a matter of fact, the defeat just got worse. And they even lost the precious Ark of the Covenant. So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated. And they fled, every man to his home. And there was a very great slaughter, for 30,000 foot soldiers of Israel died. And the ark of God was captured. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, well, they had died too. You'll remember Eli was the ruler of Israel. He wasn't the king or anything like that, but he was the high priest, and he was kind of like the most important person in Israel. Well, he was very, very old, so old that he could barely see. He was practically blind. And so obviously he did not go out to war. He stayed back. Well, after the defeat had happened, there was a man from the tribe of Benjamin who ran back to Eli to let him know about everything that happened. He told him that Israel had been defeated. He told him that his sons, Hophni and Phinehas, they didn't make it. And then he told him quite possibly the worst news of it all, the Ark of the Covenant, that special thing where God's presence dwelled in a special way. It had been captured by the Philistines. It was as if the presence of God had left Israel. So when Eli heard this news, he was so upset. He was so shocked. And, well, scripture tells us that he was also a very large man, like very large. And so when he got this news, he actually, I think accidentally, fell back out of his chair. He fell over and hurt himself so bad that he died. This is pretty terrible news. I mean, Israel has been defeated. The Ark of the Covenant has been taken by the Philistines. Hophni and Phinehas, and now their father Eli have all died. It feels hopeless. And just like that Ark of the Covenant left, it feels like God has left his people. But God has not truly left his people, because God is a God who forgives. He's not a God that needs to be trapped in like some ark or in some idol. But he's a God who is everywhere at all times. And he is a God who is gracious and merciful, which means that he does not treat us like we deserve when we mess up, but he keeps on loving us even though we do things that are not right, and sometimes we just are not following him like we should be. But we can't forget something super important, and that is that Samuel is still very much alive and well. And Samuel is a man that doesn't only know things about God like Eli and Hophni and Phinehas, but he is a man who is growing and starting to learn who God really is, really getting to know God. And he wants to love God and serve God. And this is great news for the people of Israel. Well, folks, it's all the time that we have for today. And you know what? This headband look is starting to grow on me. I think I might stick with this and ditch the hat. I don't know. We'll see. But I wanted to remind you one last time, or for the first time in this video, that we have some verses we're memorizing, right? And you'll actually be able to watch the song that we've been learning on a separate video that will be uploaded onto YouTube at the same time that you get this video. So make sure that you're listening to that song and learning these verses. And let's see, what have we learned so far? We have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love. According to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions and cleanse me from my sin. Now this week you're learning, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. All right? Do you think you can learn that? I think you can learn that. And if you do learn that, you'll get 5 tickets just for that verse. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. If you say that, you'll get 5 tickets. You'll get another ticket for the other verses that you have memorized in children's church world or your Sunday school classes or whatever. And it looks like you guys are starting to already get enough tickets to get some of those big prizes, which is pretty exciting. I can't wait to see you guys. And don't forget, if you're not coming to church for whatever reason, but you have memorized verses, just let me know. You know, your parents can send me an email, text, phone call, whatever, and I'll make sure to get some awesome prizes to you as well, all right? I'll catch you guys later.